In this PowerPoint, we're going to look at a specific example of a question paper, what the question papers will look like and the layout and so on. And then there'll be some model answers so you can see how to put an answer together which is acceptable for the exam board. This is what the examination paper will look like when you first sit down and are given it. It's got two elements. First of all, you've got the front cover, which forms your answer book, and inside there'll be an insert which contains the text you have to read for section A. The three documents in this slide are examples of the questions that you'll be expected to answer, and you can see that they give you line allowances to write within. That doesn't mean, however, that you have to fill up every single line. The line allowances have been made really to cater for everybody's different styles of writing, whether they write with really big handwriting and so on. This is the example text upon which we're going to base the model answers in the subsequent slides. You'll see, if you look at the very top, that it gives you context of what's going on in the text. So we know straight away that it's about a character called Jo March who is attempting to do some cookery. We also know the text that it's from Little Women by Louisa M. Alcott. And you'll see the line numbers that I've previously mentioned down the right hand side, and equally if you look at the bottom of page 1, then there are numbers associated with words which the exam board have defined for you. Question 1 simply says, from lines 1 to 5, identify a phrase which shows that Jo needed cheering up. And if you read the extract on the right hand side of this slide, this is a repetition of lines 1 to 5. Now if you notice, it doesn't actually say she needed cheering up, so you have to find a phrase or a sentence that implies this, which means you're reading between the lines to some extent to extract the implied meaning. I put it in red. The walk revived her spirits. Revived there meaning it made her feel better, which suggests that she needed cheering up. So the model answer underneath, again in the red font, is the full sentence. A phrase which shows Jo needs cheering up is revived her spirits. And if you notice there, what we've done is written a full sentence. We've used a phrase from the text and we put it in inverted commas to show that it's not our language but the language of the writer. Equally important is that the words of the question have been used to show that you've understood the question. Question 2 looks at the material contained between lines 7 and 13 and asks you to give 2 ways in which the writer shows that Jo is not a confident cook. Now if you look at the text again at the top right hand side of this slide, you have to gain from the text why she's not a confident cook, and again its implied meaning. So for example, when somebody comes and complains that the bread has flowed over the pans, that would imply that she's not a good cook, as would the fact that when she serves the dinner up, it becomes a standing joke. Nobody would make it a standing joke if the dinner was excellent, so you have to get that from the material you're given. So let's look now at question 3. This is taken from lines 26 to 37, and again they are replicated on this slide. And the question asks how the writer uses language and structure to show the reactions of those eating the dinner. It does importantly say, support your views with references to the text, which is a subtle way of telling you that you need to include quotations. And if you look at the model answer, we've got 3 areas that we might explore. From those 3 areas, you will give 2 or 3 examples, and that should be enough to give you your 6 marks. So, for instance, in the model answer, you could say, the writer comments on the people's behaviour to show they are trying to enjoy the meal. And then you can look back up at the text and see how that is proven. So their behaviour, for instance, would be that Amy giggled, Meg looked distressed, and Miss Crocker pursed her lips. The other person that you may include in this is with Laurie, who's talking with all his might to try and make everything look as if it was perfect. The next bullet point you could pick up is where the writer comments on the people's reactions as they put food into their mouths. So, for instance, you could talk about Miss Crocker, who made a wry face and drank some water. With Laurie, he's eating away manfully, though there was a slight pucker about his mouth. So that would suggest that he's not really enjoying his meal, but is trying really hard to. Amy, again, had to hide her face in her napkin, presumably to spit the food out into it. So that would imply she's not enjoying her meal. And lastly, you could pick up that the writer shows their physical reactions rather than describing what they've said. Nobody actually talks in this, and it's as if we're looking in on the scene to see their reactions. But you do need to include a quotation and then explain what that suggests to achieve the full marks. This slide shows you those 3 elements in sharp focus. So you will see the statement, the quotation, and then the comment to make the full point. So you'll aim to write about 3 sentences for each point like this. And notice that the best way to add a comment is to use one of these expressions: demonstrates, suggests, implies, reveals, and so on. Question 4 is undoubtedly the hardest question in this section. It gains the most marks, but it also means that you have to look at the text as a whole to make your points. If you look at the question, it says evaluate how successfully this is achieved. So evaluate means that you have to say it has been successful. Remember, it's easier to argue success than it is to argue that it's not successful. And again, we get that allusion to quotations: support your views with detailed reference to the text. The best way to approach question 4 is to start from the very beginning of the text and work your way through logically. Try not to make points that are from the end and then jump back to the middle and then go back to the start and so on, because it's quite confusing both for you and for the examiner. In your answer, you should state what the experience is to begin with, and then that gives you something to argue. So in this case, our statement is: the writer successfully creates the experience of doing something new through the character of Joe, who finds it hard. And we have to have that "who finds it hard," otherwise it won't make proper sense. What you go on to argue is examples then of how she finds it hard. She finds it hard because it doesn't make her happy. She finds it hard because she doesn't know how to buy proper ingredients. And she finds it hard because she didn't cook any of the ingredients properly. And you'll see how we've done this when I take it apart in the next slide. This is exactly the same wording that we've just looked at on the previous slide, only this time I've color-coded it so that you can see how each element works. So we start with the green font, which is the statement. We then add quotations, which we embed into the writing so that it becomes part of your sentence. And then from time to time, you can add in an explanation. To gain even more marks in question 4, though, you do need to include other things that are related to how the writer successfully describes the experience of trying to do something new. And these are indicated in the green bullets. These are the two statements, and then to complete them, you'd have to add quotations and explanations to prove what you're saying. At the very end of your answer, best advice is to go back to the wording of the question and comment something along the lines of, the writer successfully presents the experience of learning something new as difficult and challenging through the combination of these techniques. Conclusions are always the hardest because you need to avoid just repeating what you've already said, and this nicely rounds things up. There are a few final points to note. Keep the question in focus and keep repeating the focus. Our focus here is that learning something new is hard. Remember in question 4 to use all of the text to argue your point, and use a final summary sentence using the words of the question. And in that way, you'll have stayed on task throughout the whole question. The good thing to end with this section is that whatever you say, as long as you back it up, will be given credit. There's no specific right or wrong answers. It's more how you argue your case.